disbelief or suspension. Such were the advancements in the believability of synthetic images. Many were convinced of events that had never happened. They had both noticed how the boundaries were so easily blurred, the general assumption of, if it is seen, then it is real, even on minuscule budgets. Beginning as an art video entitled Let the Crime Fit the Punishment and inspired by expanding, computer-generated, Archimedean Aqua, mobility, the face of an infamous wartime villain was digitally mapped onto the charming visage of a very talented straps, and mastication, bondage arm eating, deep penetration aficionado, in post-production, and subsequently circulated discreetly amongst the art clubs off campus, together with a selection of their other early AV experiments. The video was seen by at least 28 people, and as a fan of some other twins miniature Gorefest sculptures, a substantial anonymous donation, from the Sassoon Foundation, was made by an interested third party, and, suddenly having such a benevolent angel, the students vowed to take a year out from agroeconomics and devote themselves to a series of gratuitous experiments in discrete artificial events of doubtful aesthetic validity and even more dubious good taste. In similar mode, their next piece entitled Algieri's Vision was a celebration of the beautiful game, featuring the secret family film of the inverted dangling of the gang of similarly renowned Romans subtly mapped into slowly rippling 3D spheres, with the sound of wind and creaking ropes, montage the grinding of an axe head, the fluttering display of a peacock, to a glare of discordant trumpets and the subsequent celebratory kickabout in front of joyous crowds in the streets of Giuliano di Mesgra, with a face expressing infinite hubris joyfully singing Giovinezza at the top of its voice, again digitally mapped onto a distinctly squarish ball. Followed by speeded up red sauce copiously released, with emphasized vulgar sound effects, onto gaping tongues, slavering mouths and breasts and buttocks and other zones in similar contractions in rhythmical concert to an Italian Euro house music soundtrack, purporting to be IDM. Post-match, with a final roar from the crowd, the still noisy, rather messy-looking remains are cursorily kicked into the river, tuneful cartoonesque bubbles and a winding wine-colored stain into the sunset, titles, GOOL. And final silence. They thought it quite operatic in form, and the third, of course dear reader, you can guess, celebrating the first Media Olympics, a new sport of kings, in suspiciously large numbers cheerfully eschewing their bungees, dived from primitive computer-generated images of helicopters into synthesized shark fin-riddled waves. Vuelos de la Muerte, with edited-in close-ups of their gleeful smiling faces, originally at gunpoint for fear for their families, with the intended effect of being filmed in grainy black and white in the style of Riefenstahl. They were to be found the next day breathlessly sunbathing, being happily washed up upon the beach in their dozens. Soundtrack monumental, Wagnerian, as Leni and Imelda's faces smiling and chatting with their mentors and fuck buddies are shown in slow motion on a screen underneath a perspex table, upon which naked filthy hairy legs squat in stiff black leather unlaced boots, genitals, and the nozzle fingers smearing freshly emerging chocolate spread about to reveal different aspects of the image on the screen, finger painting to zoom in through the ghoulish bird perfume mask, medieval Dr. Sitar string flex exploding, colliding hurricane finches, shimmer September blossoms, holographic furred hummingbird moth, probed petaled apex, crystal orchid kaleidoscopes. Seeking the portrayal of a more realistic and immediately sensory-type experience in their fourth video, they devised an act of ritualized Cromwellian retribution for those of the infinite shush mindset, the silencers, the pretenders. Kyle, squinting slightly, having bumped into a door. In the real-life and actual televised police interrogation, they explained under duress how they had used a metal detector to locate the medallion of the hospital janitor and exhumed his carcass to be anchored like El Cid with a smoldering cheroot, Bolivar, medium-sized, into a jogging legs exoskeleton for paraplegics modified for Wi-Fi control with a heat-sensing arm pointing an 80,000-volt taser at anyone who deigned approach. Filmed it with hover drone cameras, jogging slowly around the foyer of the television center in a pink and orange polyester tracksuit until the batteries ran down or a security detail arrived to silence the amplified MP3 player relaying the famous TV catchphrases in a continuous loop. It was later revealed to be an elaborate hoax. All hoaxes are elaborate. A spectre at the Tea Party. The stinking corpse constructed from sewn-together bits of pig cadaver and packaging polystyrene, the skull plastic, the decaying staring visage 3D printed in silicone rubber, enhanced with real HP sauce, real garden soil, real cow pus and real live-wriggling maggots fixed with gelatine, the crowning white hippie dresses bought online, the horrified expressions of the onlookers and TV executives, priceless. The best part of the floating video that was seized by police, unusually leaked to the media, screened twice accidentally on the 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. news roundup and quickly suppressed. After 5 months following a particular train of thought and, hyper-aware of future potential restrictions in budget, they transferred much of the live-action elements of their work to be filmed and cast in Eastern Europe, and subcontracted much of the location responsibilities and direction to a local film producer, Stanislav Vivicic, who had reputedly worked with Kowiecki in the early 90s. Although he seemed more than happy to oblige on low budgets, much of the return material deviated substantially from their scripts, and appeared to be filmed on VHS videotape rather than with the high-definition cameras they had supplied, but they put it down to translation difficulties and took it as artistic license and, loving Lo-fi, resolved to view the downgrade in expected definition as a blessing in disguise, for they sensed a kindred sensibility in operation, albeit unconventionally. Over several months, and on a minimal budget, the material they received back far superseded their wildest expectations. It seemed like these economies of scale could prove very worthwhile. Probably at 100th of the outlay of what it would require to organize these production facilities in England, the sets, the costumes and casts of dozens and dozens and innumerable synthetic CG extras seemed almost improbable. Torture houses perfectly simulated with appropriate instruments, the Judas Cradle, the authentic-looking Iron Maiden, a man trussed up to resemble a Buddhist in prayer drinking pretend petrol, the forcing down the throat of small gas canisters with a broom handle, the realistic jets of flames from the mouth and eye sockets, the rifle butts smashing into faces and howls and muffled screams and gunshots in the distance. All expertly choreographed in single-shot mise-en-scene worthy of Wells. The live flaying of burgeoning ex-virgins all perfectly recreated in CGI and utterly hyper-realistic, and the upside-down hanging by legs of the 15 orphans and the simultaneous sawing entirely in half with a motorized bandsaw was a minor triumph of low-fidelity computer-generated artcore cinematography, and although the prolonged multiple scenes of bestiality at gunpoint, and electroshock-trained rabid dog human hunting scenes were perhaps a trifle excessive, they reveled in the potential shock value of the material. On a relatively minimal budget they had managed to recreate a panoply of the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition by proxy. The realism of the videos was frequently unsettling, but they paradoxically accounted for this with the downgrade in quality, the way the human mind fills in the gaps. The glitches and oversaturated color and graininess oddly only added to the verisimilitude. In an email Leonard comments, "Mr. Vivicic, Stan, we didn't realize you had such a sophisticated CGI post-production rig set up. We can rearrange remuneration as you wish, as you have become a third member of our team. We must also compliment you on your Foley artist. The psychoacoustics and the emotional impact of the sound effects for the scenes are chillingly realistic. We have an associate who is interested in having him work on a well-financed project for a few months at Pinewood. If you can spare him, please forward his contact details. Just one minor point. We realize you have included the blurred-out date stamps in the corners of the videos as artistic license, but if you could possibly avoid these in future, please, as they overly convolve the historical context of the pieces. Thanks L. Kyle's favorite piece, however, was intended as a personal historical recreation. A carefully scripted dramatic enactment set to a fragment from Olivier Messiaen's Quatuor pour la fin du temps, as he commented to Stan in a gushingly complimentary email. So reminiscent of Terry and Ken's work. I just love your style. Those painful searching chords and soaring ons matter not, as syringes pierce the sweating trembling puckered skins of the figures tightly bound to chairs and neck supports. The 2-inch tacks progressively hammered into the finger bones of the bound vocalists who must scream in tune, conducted by a dead chimpanzee's arm twitching under electric stimuli whilst having their hemispheres separated one by one with coping saws, whilst that hilarious avant-garde style atonal soprano screeches out what sound like beer hall quiz questions, as they look at their naked wives and children on soundless video screens in a distress flare-lit snowbound pen poked by laughing mercenaries with cattle prods and red glowing rifle muzzles, cowering from something caked in congealing blood and feces with an inward spiked iron collar, some nightmarish half-human hybrid creature twitching at the end of an electrical cable. None of this was in the script outline, but this time Stan had totally surpassed himself so as to also hire a drunken-looking audience, howling and baying with the most disgusting mindless relish, pretending to gorge on vodka and beer, dressed in the costumes of local soldiers and militia and 1980s prostitutes, orthodox cassocks and characters in greased-up bondage kit. And then the highlight. The hostess gushingly placing her hand on her heart introduces the main event to taped applause, a male figure presumably meant to be pumped up with amphetamines, Spanish fly or pain suppressants maybe? Lit with multi-directional out-of-phase blue, white strobe lights glittering, covered in silver leaf, suspended from the rafters by meat hooks on wires writhing to escape until it tore itself to pieces, raining shimmering body fluids through subsequent simulated smoke sheet laser layers on the baying mob like a human pinata, kind of blurry, but beautifully animated in slow-mo nonetheless, with the hyper-cheesy Euro polka house karaoke drowning out the half-screaming half-laughing vocal of the hanging figure as the crowd turns itself inside out into a writhing mass of mindless pulsating filth. They assumed Stan must have a couple of specialists writing liquid and muscle subroutines for the 3D software in-house to achieve these most unusually complex effects, all in all a totally inspired move, a tour de force even. Even after several inquiries they had still received no details for credits about the actors or C.G. post-production team. But since it was in Eastern Europe, the union formalities, with the Digital Sculptors Guild and Equity, were probably not carved in stone nor strictly applicable anyhow. And although the blurred-out date stamps remained, it was a small sacrifice, and they marveled at their own ingenuity at the delegation and farming out of all of this tricky production work. Delighted when their new series was shown alongside the newly discovered Borderline interviews. Bleak, single-shot CCTV-style monochromatic, discreetly violent psychological interrogations, in Gaelic, English, Mandarin, Thai, Romanian, Arabic, Croatian, Korean, Ethiopian, and Russian, set in interview rooms, private apartments, subterranean government offices and prison cells, all from the same high-angle God's eye view, subsequently subtitled in English for initial UK release and posthumously attributed to Hamilton. So, with not unfavourable reviews of Meow Meow after the exhibition at the Walker Art Gallery, the Guggenheim, Pompidou and BFI, and after comparisons with Pop Art Cinema, Kyle and Leonard are in negotiations for the funding and exhibition of a new series of 3D Pepper's Ghost installation videographs about how it would now be deemed far too impolite and invasive to put someone on trial for an unmentionable word, beginning with G, and loosely based on the lives of the exemplary 18th-century literary historical hypothetical amoralists, under the provisional title, SHHH.